What do you do when the only thing left of someone you loved is a horse they left behind? It was late February, and New York carried its usual kind of winter. Not soft or romantic like the postcards wanted you to believe, but bone-deep cold. The kind that froze puddles into shards of glass along the curb. The kind that pressed into your chest until breathing hurt. Snow had melted into a dirty slush that clung to boots and tires alike. But in Central Park, frost still lingered. It crunched under the shoes of the man who had walked this same path. Every night for weeks. He wasn't here for the joggers or the carriages that still rattled along under tourists' laughter. He came because the air smelled different inside the stables. Not the asphalt and exhaust of the city, but hay and leather, old wood, sweat. Life that wasn't rushing somewhere. The barn was quieter than it used to be. A few horses shifted inside, their stalls, tails swishing lazily. But one stall was different. He could feel it before he saw it. The hush in the air. The weight that seemed to press heavier against his chest the closer he came. That was the stall where Arthur stood. Arthur, the horse the city couldn't forget. The one who had bolted through traffic months earlier. Hooves shattering glass, metal bending under his weight, eyes wide with panic while cameras rolled. He had been chaos embodied, a storm running blind through New York's orderly grid. But now he was just a horse, large, chestnut, coat dulled by winter light. His head hung slightly lower than the others. His breath rose in slow clouds, each exhale warmer than the silence surrounding him. One ear flicked at the sound of approaching boots. The man stopped at the edge of the stall door. He didn't reach out, didn't call the horse's name. He just stood there, fingers shoved deep into his coat pockets, knuckles pressed so hard against bone they ached. He had promised himself he wouldn't come here again, that he wouldn't let this place keep pulling him back. But grief doesn't care about promises. His brother had loved this horse, not Arthur, not by name, not even by ownership. His brother hadn't owned much of anything, but he loved watching the horses line up along Central Park South. He'd stand there, coffee in hand, telling stories about them like he knew each one personally. "He's the strong one," he used to say, nodding at Arthur. "The one who'll keep pulling even when everything else says stop." The man had laughed at that once. He wished he hadn't. Now his brother was gone, and Arthur was all that was left. He shifted his weight, boots grinding frost into stone. Arthur's eyes, deep and dark, lifted just slightly to meet his. Not recognition, just presence. The man exhaled, breath shaky in the cold. He had thought horses were just animals. He had thought coming here would make no difference, that it was foolish to think standing near this creature could fill the hollow his brother's absence carved into him. But something about Arthur's stillness forced him to stay. Arthur stepped forward. Just once, a slow, deliberate shift of weight, hooves dull against straw. His head tilted slightly, nostrils widening as he drew in the man's scent. Wool, city air, grief carried like another layer of clothing. The man's shoulders tensed. He wanted to step back, but couldn't. His heart thudded against his ribs, in a rhythm that belonged more to memory than to the present moment. Arthur's breath touched his sleeve. Warm, steady. The man swallowed. His throat burned. He hadn't cried at the funeral. He hadn't cried in the hospital, or when the call came, or when he'd found the old coffee cup sitting on the counter with his brother's fingerprints still ghosting the rim. But now, with a horse pressing his muzzle gently against the fabric of his coat, he felt the first crack splinter through him. He lifted a hand, hesitant, trembling, and let it hover just above Arthur's cheek. The horse didn't flinch, didn't move away, only blinked slowly, as if waiting. His fingers brushed coarse winter hair. Not soft, not easy. Real. Arthur's ears twitched, then settled again. The man let his hand rest there, palm open, skin against life. He didn't know why he felt lighter. He didn't know why his knees wanted to give way, or why his chest ached in that unbearable, necessary way. He only knew that something about standing there, touching this horse, felt like standing at the edge of his brother's laughter again. Minutes passed, or maybe only seconds. When he finally pulled his hand away, Arthur lifted his head higher. Not much. Just enough to keep his eyes level with the man's. The man took a step back. His breath hitched. He wanted to leave before he gave in to whatever was clawing its way out of him. But as he turned, Arthur did something strange. He stepped forward again, closing the gap to the stall door. His hooves shifted softly against the straw, tail flicking once in the dim light. He let out a low breath. Not a snort, not alarmed. Just steady. Deliberate. The man froze. He didn't know why, but it felt like the horse was asking him not to go. The barn was quiet except for that breath. Except for the faint rustle of hay. Except for the pounding inside his chest that refused to calm. He turned back slowly, eyes locked on Arthur's. And the thought came uninvited, sharp and piercing as frost. Why him? Why this horse? His brother had loved many things. Coffee, books with worn covers, the way autumn painted the city. But he had never spoken with such certainty about anything as he had about this horse. He'll keep pulling, his brother had said. No matter what. And now here he was, still pulling, dragging the man into a grief he didn't want to face, into a bond he hadn't chosen, but suddenly couldn't turn away from. The man gripped the stall door tighter. He felt splinters bite into his skin. He didn't know what he was supposed to do. Didn't know why his feet refused to move toward the exit. All he knew was this. When he finally stepped away, Arthur followed him with his gaze. Not wild, not panicked like the headlines had painted him. Just present. Just there. And the man realized something that made his chest ache deeper than before. He wasn't sure who was holding on to whom anymore. The days blurred into weeks, and still, he came back. Not every day. Not enough for anyone at the stables to notice. But often enough that Arthur began to expect the sound of those boots on the stone floor, the hesitant pause at the stall door, the quiet presence that filled the barn without words. Arthur was calmer, now than the newspapers remembered him. The city had called him dangerous, out of control, a menace. But horses don't carry headlines. They carry memory. And memory clung to Arthur like the scars you couldn't see. The sudden tightening of muscle at the clang of a dropped bucket. The way his head jerked when tires screeched outside on the avenue. The tremor that ran through his body when someone moved too fast. But with him, this man who never spoke, Arthur was different. The man didn't push, didn't demand. He just stood there, hands buried deep in his coat pockets, eyes red from nights that never quite ended in sleep. Sometimes he reached out to touch Arthur's muzzle, just once, steady and soft. Other times he didn't move at all. But Arthur leaned forward anyway, as though he knew something fragile lived in the silence between them. The bond crept in quietly, like frost threading across a window pane. One night the man stayed longer than usual. The barn was nearly empty, the workers gone, the air filled only with the rustle of hay and the occasional snort from another stall. Arthur shifted, weight rocking lazily from hoof to hoof, and then did something he hadn't done before. He nudged the man's shoulder, not hard, not demanding, just a gentle press of warm breath and velvet skin. The man froze. His eyes flicked, down, then back up. His lips parted as though words wanted to come but got stuck in his throat. Arthur nudged again, and something inside the man cracked open. He laughed. It was quiet, broken, choked at the edges. But it was laughter. His hand lifted and rested against Arthur's cheek, fingers trembling. "You don't even know," he whispered, voice raw, "what you mean to me." Arthur flicked an ear, leaning into the touch, his eyes half-lidded. It was the first time the man had spoken to him. The words spilled easier after that. Not all at once, not like a flood, but slowly, in fragments. A confession here, a memory there. Words he had never shared with anyone else. Offered to a horse who couldn't answer but always listened. "You were his favorite," he murmured once, stroking the ridge of Arthur's nose. "He used to stand out there for hours watching you. Said you were stronger than all the others. Said you wouldn't quit." Arthur shifted, ears flicking, as if he understood. "He was wrong about me, though," the man added. "I quit the second he left." The words hung in the cold air, heavier than the frost outside. Arthur didn't move away. He stayed pressed, close, his breath warming the man's sleeve until the weight lifted just enough for the man to breathe again. But the past has a way of finding you when you least expect it. It happened on a Saturday. He had come earlier than usual, hoping to avoid the crowd. A handler was cleaning stalls, whistling softly, and on a workbench nearby sat a stack of old harnesses. Leather cracked, brass buckles dulled by time. Arthur stiffened the moment the man's eyes drifted there. His ears shot back, muscles tightening, hooves shifting against the straw. A low tremor shivered through his frame. The man frowned. "What is it?" he whispered, more to himself than to Arthur. He stepped closer to the bench. The smell of old leather and oil filled his nose. His hand reached out almost unconsciously, fingers brushing across a worn strap. His thumb traced the faint carving in the leather. Just initials, faded, but still there. JM, his brother's initials. The man staggered back, the air ripped from his lungs. He knew this wasn't possible. His brother hadn't been a carriage driver. He hadn't owned a horse. He had just watched them from the curb, coffee in hand. But here, carved into leather older than memory, were his initials, staring back like a message he wasn't supposed to find. He dropped the strap as though it burned him. His chest heaved, vision blurring. The walls of the barn seemed to close in, the smell of hay turning sharp, suffocating. Arthur's hooves shifted loudly against the straw. He pressed forward against the stall door, head lifting, eyes locked on the man. His breath came heavier, but not in panic, in urgency. The man sank against the wooden post, knees weak. His hands shook as he dragged them across his face, trying to hold himself together. But the dam had broken. For the first time since the funeral, he cried. Not quiet tears. Not the kind you could swallow back. But sobs that racked his whole body, shattering the silence of the barn. His breath came ragged, chest convulsing, grief pouring out in raw, unrestrained waves. Arthur stayed pressed close. He didn't move, didn't shy, didn't turn away. He simply lowered his head, resting the weight of it against the stall door so that his muzzle brushed the man's shoulder. A gentle, grounding weight. The man's sobs slowed. His breathing steadied. His trembling hands finally fell still, and when he opened his swollen eyes, Arthur was still there, watching him, holding him up in the only way a horse can, by not leaving. Time shifted after that. The days grew longer. The frost melted into spring. Tourists filled the park again, but the man didn't notice them. He noticed Arthur. The way his coat began to gleam in the sunlight again. The way his body seemed looser, calmer, each tremor less than the one before, healing in small and quiet ways. He found himself laughing more often now. Not much, not loud, but real. Sometimes it came when Arthur snorted hay onto his jacket. Sometimes when the horse rested his head on the man's chest, as if testing whether he could carry not just carriages, but broken hearts too. And one evening, when the barn was filled with golden light from the setting sun, Arthur did something he hadn't done before. He led the man, not out into the park, not toward the noise of the city, but to the far corner of the stable, where an old wooden box sat covered in dust. The man frowned, brushing it clean. Inside, beneath old harnesses and brushes, was a photograph. It was his brother, standing in front of Arthur. The photo was worn, edges curling, colors faded, but it was him, smiling, hand resting proudly against Arthur's neck. The man's breath caught. His knees buckled as he sank to the ground, photo trembling in his grasp. All this time, he had thought his brother had just admired the horses from afar. But he had been here. With Arthur. With the very horse who had somehow carried the memory of him forward, waiting for the moment when grief and love would collide again. The man pressed the photo to his chest. Tears came, but softer this time. Not ripping him apart, but stitching him together. Arthur lowered his head, eyes calm, breath warm against the man's hair. Sometimes healing doesn't come in explanations. Sometimes it comes in presence, in being carried forward by something that refuses to let you quit. He finally stood, wiping his face, the photo safe in his pocket. Arthur blinked slowly, ears flicking forward as if satisfied. The man reached out one last time, hand against Arthur's cheek. His voice broke as he whispered, "Thank you for carrying him when I couldn't." Arthur leaned in, steady, strong, alive. And in that moment, the man understood. His brother had been right. Arthur would keep pulling, no matter what. Sometimes, the ones who carry you are the ones no one else saw coming. If this story touched you, subscribe, leave a comment, and press the bell so you can be here for the next story that just might change your heart.